All right, y'all. This is the second time today I've tried to record this video, and I'm really hoping it works. It's like nighttime. I just put my kids to bed, and I want to get this done so it gets to you all. Okay, so the things I'm going to cover in this video are I'm going to give a brief review of stuff that we've already done in the class over the last 5, 6 weeks. Um, I'm going to give an explanation of the assignment that I've given you for this week and how it relates to the final. And I'm going to clarify moving forward what I'm planning to do with the rest of the syllabus and how the assignments are going to work. So in order to do that, I'm going to show you these slides. Hope y'all are having a good day. Okay, so system thinking and severe mental illness part two, emergent strategy versus the mind fixers. I had a lot of fun putting this together. I hope you enjoy it. So, Adrienne Marie Brown, we're gonna do a dive into her thinking this week, and she says emergent strategy is about shifting the way we see and feel the world and each other. If we begin to understand ourselves as a practice ground for transformation, we can transform the world. And for those of you who did the generative somatics work this last week, you'll recognize that she's using language straight out of GS. She's talking about like what we do, whatever we do is practice. And I'm referring back to this image of the dandelion, this idea of pulling ideas up from the underground so that they can have an effect on the mainstream. That is my goal for this week's lesson. Okay, so I'm going to review once again Adrienne Marie Brown's language on fractals. A fractal is a never-ending pattern. Fractals are infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. They are created by repeating a simple process over and over in an ongoing feedback loop. How we are at the small scale is how we are at the large scale. The patterns of the universe repeat at scale. There is a structural echo that suggests two things. One, that there are shapes and patterns fundamental to our universe, and two, that what we practice as a small scale can reverberate to the larger scale. I think this is really important as we're moving forward because what it gives us is the sense that we can do things on a small scale, just with each other, just the way that you're practicing with your clients in the agency where you're working, and that the way that you're working, it actually ends up having reverberating effects on the larger scale. This idea of circular causality is really important when we're thinking about systems thinking, right? This idea that you as the therapist are having an effect on the client that you're working with, but they are clearly having an effect back on you as well, and that like playing with that causality is important, and then that dynamic plays out whether you're talking about a dyad of a client and practitioner, or whether you're talking about a family system, or whether you're talking about a school, or whether you're talking about a corporation or a country or a war. It just goes on and on. I'm going to read you this quote that I put in your assignment. This is Dick Schwartz at the end of the book on page 252 of your textbook. He says, we propose that burdens, imbalances, polarizations, and leadership problems cycle through human systems at all levels and create parallel processes that reflect and reinforce each other. When self-leadership is absent at any given level of a system, the triadic structure of exiles, managers, and firefighters develops. When managers lead, firefighters rebel. When firefighters lead, managers panic. When managers and firefighters vie for leadership, polarizations abound and trauma regenerates itself in the four arenas we have discussed: development, balance, harmony, and leadership. So this is at the end of the book, but there's a whole section where he's talking about development, balance, harmony, and leadership. Self is the antidote to our cultural legacy burdens. Self self-compassion, clarity, and connectedness challenge racism, patriarchy, individualism, and materialism. And since human systems levels are interconnected, self-leadership at any level helps us heal all levels. We believe that each client who unburdens helps reduce the burden load of the planet, allowing all of us to have a little more access to the self. So that is the idea from internal family systems that I want you to reflect on when you're thinking about this work. And as we talked about in the first class, this idea, if you're talking about the psychiatric system, the difference between first order change and second order change is a first order change is some surface level change, and second order change is a deeper structural change. So that just leads us to Adrienne Marie Brown, who, I clearly have a lot of respect for because I brought her into this course, and I just want you to get a sense of like the breadth of her work and the stuff that she's been doing in the world. But for this class, for this week, I'm going to ask you to read the first chapter of Emergent Strategy. And I want to point back to generative somatics because one of the connections between Adrienne Marie Brown and this class is that she was a lead trainer at generative somatics for many years, and that's part of the context that I know her work in. And that she brings a lot of language, and whether you had a chance to do that reading or not, I hope you'll hold on to it, and at some point it'll come in handy for you. Okay, so let's move on to talk about Mind Fixers, Psychiatry's Troubled Search for the Biology of Mental Illness by Anne Harrington. I'm having you read a couple chapters out of this book for this week, and there's a few other chapters I'm going to have you read in future weeks. This book just came out a couple years ago, and I feel like she's so articulate, basically about the failure of biological psychiatry. And as folks who are going to work in the public mental health system, part of what I want you to have is the vocabulary of why biopsychiatry is such a failure. And so I think that this historical analysis of biological psychiatry will really help you do that. I want to revisit this idea because what I'm asking you to do is to reflect like the difference in this week and as opposed to all the other weeks that we've had where I've given you assignments is that this week I'm actually asking you to think about how you want things to be. Like if the world could be the way you wanted it, if you could practice the kind of therapy you wanted to practice, what would you bring to it? What's the literature? What's the philosophy? What's the art? What's the music? What are things that have inspired you? And between now and when you turn in your final assignment, I want you to think deeply about that and try and articulate it in a way that you can look back on and be like, this is what's important to me. This is what I care about. So there's that. I want you to continue to think systemically, and I put this image of the fractals here to just illustrate what Dick Schwartz was saying about self-similarity and about how things that happen on small levels also happen on large levels. And the more you can use the way you think about what's happening in your individual process, what's going on with you in your IFS work, what's going on with you interpersonally, then it'll become more clear how you're working with families and how you're working in your agency and how you're working in society. So I'm not sure how many of you caught this, but the structural competency reading that I gave you, the main author on it was also the main author of The Protest Psychosis, How Schizophrenia Became a Black Disease, which is a book I brought in the first day to show you, Jonathan Metzl. And I just bring it up here because you all had great responses when I posted this reading, and I just like it's a critical piece. It's like it's a really solid analysis that I feel like you can use that's going to come in handy when you're working on the system. And then there's this idea of the shadow, whether we're talking about the personal shadow, the things that we're not seeing ourselves, like that. You remember on the first IFS exercise that I gave you to do, I asked you to reflect on a bunch of things that were maybe things you weren't used to thinking about, or maybe things you hadn't integrated. So there's that aspect of the personal shadow. And then there's also the societal shadow. I gave you all the videos to watch about, how people who have been diagnosed with severe mental illness end up being treated by society and by the system, and the relationship between these things. And then, of course, the section that I gave you on trauma, I've just started now to get to look at your responses to them, but I think it's obviously really critical when we're talking about severe mental illness to have a clear language of trauma. And so this is like one more aspect to keep in mind when you're thinking about, like, okay, what have I learned in this class? What's coming up for me? How do I integrate it? And then, of course, oh, Carl Jung, where is your quote? Your quote has disappeared, but it's a quote about something about you need to see your dark side. If you need to see your shadow side if you're going to understand other people. Complicated guy, that Carl Jung, but he inspired a lot of good thinking. Okay, so these are things that we haven't yet covered. We haven't yet talked about open dialogue, which is a systemic family therapy practice like internal family systems, but specifically for working with people diagnosed with psychosis. And we'll get there. And we haven't yet talked about compassionate focused therapy, which is another model for working with people who are diagnosed with psychosis. We haven't yet had the conversation about psychiatric drugs, and I'm definitely going to. I haven't put the module together yet, but it's going to be a mix of talking about psychiatric drugs and then psychedelic drugs. I think that there are a few of you that have already mentioned the importance of psychedelic drugs in this realm, and I'm psyched to give you a chance to think about it and read about it. And then, of course, I say of course, but we haven't talked about it that much. But this is a huge piece of where I come from, which is the peer world, like the world that's not the clinical world, but the world of people who are providing mutual aid and peer support for each other. And I'm going to do my best to introduce you to as many aspects of the peer world as I can while we have time together. Oh, and then finally, you guys were there were a number of you responded. I gave you that 3-minute video to watch about Ida, and you were like, why are you making us watch this? Like, we don't, like, we're not going to pay more money for our already overpriced education. And I'm sorry, you all. I put it there because I was excited, because literally I've been working on Ida for 7 years, and we just finished this international curriculum, and I basically just wanted to show it to you because I was proud of it, but I could see how it was a little out of context. Anyway, Ida is your friend. It's out there, and hopefully it'll be a useful resource for you. Okay, so we're almost at the end of this little presentation here. I have yet to talk about this, but TMAPs, or transformative mutual aid practices, is the tool that I've been developed with some friends back in the Icarus Project days, and I'm introducing it here. Here, I'll show you. I'll give you a definition. Transformative mutual aid practices provides a space for building a personal map of wellness strategies, resilience practices, unique stories, and community resources. Creating a TMAP will inspire you to connect your struggle to collective struggles. When we make and share our TMAPs with others, they become potent tools for healing and liberation. There's a website, tmapscommunity.net, that you can go to. But the reason I put it here is because I think in your final, basically the idea of making a written document is that it becomes a map to be able to look at when you're having a hard time. And I think what I'm going to do in your final is actually have you make a document like this, but base it on all the stuff that we've learned all semester. I'm still figuring that out, but let's go over the assignment for this week, and it'll become more clear. Okay. So for this week, the 3 questions I'm asking are: what are the major failings of the biomedical model? Whose interest does it support and protect? Like I said, I think it's important from reading that Mind Fixers book that you have that language and that critique to be able to engage in the systems where you work. Number two, if the public mental health system is a closed system, the same way a family can be a closed system, and here I'm referring to systemic family therapy and its language of closed and open systems, and the idea that, if you have an open system, if it's too open, it can be flooded with all kinds of, all kinds of things, and there need to be boundaries. But if a system is too closed, it can't let things in. How might it be helpful to open it up to new ideas and practices? I'm speaking about the public mental health system now. How might it be helpful, and what are some of the forces that keep the current system in place? I want you thinking, this is, like I said, this is different than the other weeks. I want you actually like reflecting on what could be changed in the system to make it better. And then number three, using Adrienne Marie Brown's vision of emergent strategy and everything you've been introduced to in this class so far: internal family systems, systemic family therapy, cultural structural competency, neo-Jungian therapies, somatic trauma therapies. Reflect on some of the ways systemic changes in clinical approaches to severe mental illness might affect changes in the larger society. So, let's just be clear what I'm saying. I'm not just saying, how could you change things within the system? I'm saying, if the system changed, how might that affect the society that we live in? And what groups of people would have to work together to make changes like this to make it happen? What principles might be useful to consider when thinking about this kind of change and transformation? And in your reading of Adrienne Marie Brown in that first chapter, I think you'll find plenty of bullet points that you can work with. And remember that I'm just asking for bullet points. I'm asking you just to take some notes to think about. And then once I read your responses, I'll figure out with you all what it makes sense to how to move forward with the final project. All right, so there you go. I sure hope the sound works on this and I can just be done with this for the night. I hope you all are doing really well. And I had to do a lot of changes in this class because I was expecting to actually be in person with you all that somatic stuff. And there's all kinds of things that we can't do since I'm not gonna be in person with you, but I'm trying my best to make this asynchronous learning experience as positive as possible for all of us. Okay, have a good night, good day, whatever applies.